In this video, I'm going to walk you through several recommended plugins for working with dynamic data. These plugins will help you extend your app's capabilities tremendously, and even if you don't necessarily need these for the app that you're building, understanding how these plugins work will give you more exposure to working with dynamic data in your app. So I do encourage you to experiment with them and get your hands on them. So we have a preview page here that demonstrates the capabilities of these plugins and their use cases as well. So we're just going to go through the preview so you can see what to expect, and then I'll take you into the editor to show you how the setup works and how it all comes together, how you can customize them. So the first plugin is the calendar tool. This allows you to custom design your own calendar. So this grid that we see here with the calendar dates, this is actually a repeating group, and the calendar tool plugin has generated the dates that I need for today's month, the month that I'm currently in. Now you can, of course, expand this so that the user can navigate between months in a year. So I could have next and previous buttons move to the next month. I could display the name of the month. You see that I have some conditional formatting to show me the dates from the previous month. They're a little bit more faded out in the background, whereas the dates of the current month are fuller in color, right? They're the darker black. I can choose a month here and it will highlight my selection. Because this is a repeating group, I can design the cell however I want. I can nest other things inside of the repeating group. I can display a list of events, show people's names. I can click things inside of the cell to show pop-ups, show details for other items. This gives you much more control compared to Bubble's full calendar plugin, which is more of a basic calendar output, which of course, suits a lot of basic needs. It's definitely a calendar that works out of the box. But if you need more custom capabilities around an interactive calendar, then I definitely recommend working with the calendar tool plugin for this reason. Now, with a lot of our clients who have scheduling and booking features, they'll often want to combine a calendar with offering a list of time slots. And that's where our next plugins can come in. That is the date and time toolkit. Okay, so this is a separate plugin. And what this does is it will generate a list of times and allow you to manipulate those times in many ways. So you can control the interval between the times. So right now I've got it set to an hour interval. Oh no, I'm sorry. I've got it set to a half hour. Every 30 minutes is a different time slot. I can of course change that to any interval, 1 minute, 5 minutes, an hour, 2 hours. It's up to me. I can also have it start at a specific time, end at a specific time. You see here how it starts at 8 a.m. We've got it ending at 6:30. So naturally it will do the entire 24-hour period, but you can really manipulate it so that it shows appropriate times based on however you need it to work in your app. And this is also a repeating group. So it's generated the time slots dynamically. In both of these cases, we have not touched the database. We're not saving anything to a record in the database. We're not retrieving dates and times from the database, which makes this really optimized for scale, right? We're not having to make these mass changes to the database every time we simply want to display something or generate, a big list of things. Okay, another way that you can display time slots in addition to repeating groups is also just in a drop-down, right? So if you want to set up an availability type of functionality where a service provider should choose their hours of operation, you give them 2 time slots, one to start, I start at 6 a.m. and then a second one to end. I close my day at, 3 p.m., whatever it might be. But that way they're choosing from the time slots, and you can of course custom design how this drop-down looks. So we're going to go into the back end and I'll show you how the setup works for both of these, because these are very powerful plugins that can support all sorts of custom scheduling, booking, appointment type of functionality, so you can create custom experiences around dates and times. Okay. All right, so let's move on to the preview for the next plugin that we'll be looking at, which is the API connector. This is a super powerful plugin. This is essentially your tool for connecting to the outside world. This is what will allow you to connect to any API out there. And most APIs will follow standard authentication practices, and Bubble is compatible with them. There's actually, I can't even think the last time we ran into an API that wasn't compatible with Bubble. Okay, and so what I've got connected here is we're actually hooked into our live ActiveCampaign account. So Coaching No Code Apps has an account with ActiveCampaign, which is an email marketing platform. So if you ever sign up to any one of our newsletters, if you purchase something from us, we may send you some emails with updates and things like that, tutorials, tips, and just updates on all of our content. And, we have things, our our contact list separated out into segments to make sure that our followers and our subscribers are getting the most relevant information possible and only the things that they've opted into. And so what we're displaying here is data that is coming from the ActiveCampaign account. These are our contact lists. Okay, so this list of contact lists is actually not saved in the database. It is a real-time retrieval of data from an external data source. In this case, it's ActiveCampaign, right? And I can do this from anything. I can do this from Google. I can pull in emails from my Google account. I can pull in my Google Drive folders, my spreadsheet information, or if I have other connections with other services, so my social media posts, my CRM details. And not only can I pull in information, but I can also send information out and update those services. I can use the API connector to sign someone up to my newsletter, for example. I can use the API connector to process a transaction with PayPal or Stripe. This is an incredibly powerful tool. Like I said, as long as the service you want to connect to offers an API, you will be able to connect to it through this tool here, the API connector. So it's both incoming and outgoing calls, as they're named, API calls to go in either direction, so that you can, control things from your app, but also retrieve things and pull them into your application. The next plugin that I want to look at is the Toolbox plugin. Now, this is kind of like a Swiss Army knife of tools. There's actually several different things that come with this plugin, and we're going to be looking at two of them as we find them to be the most common, most popular that our clients have used in the past. The first one is a list of numbers generator, which can be really helpful for many different use cases. Again, another way to bypass having to save records in your database or create records just to have a list of something. So let's say, for example, I wanted to create a list of numbers from 1 to 10. Okay, so I'm going to increment my list by just a step of 1. This ending number here is actually not my last number. It's actually the number of numbers that I want. So if I were to do it every 2 numbers, I still have 10 numbers total. Okay, still 10 numbers total, but it's going every 2, right? So we're not ending at number 10. This is simply the number of items that I want. If I started at number 0, then it's probably more likely what we would want to see there if we're going every 2, right? 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, and so on, all the way up until 18. This gives me 10 items. And I can take this further, right? I can create 100 items moving every 2. And this is just a real-time generation of numbers. This is a repeating group over here displaying my output, but with a couple of variables that you can make very dynamic, then it can generate that for you. You can use that as a data source for so many things, right? If I have a repeating group here, I can design each cell to display something or to retrieve something, filter something based off of that cell's number if I want. This can be used for many, many things, wherever you need a list of numbers to work off of, okay? All right, so the next tool that we'll look at within the Toolbox plugin is an expression element that will allow you to do more complex math formulas. So Bubble does have a lot of basic arithmetic functions. You can add, subtract, divide, multiply, all those things. But there isn't too much more capability in terms of more complex formulas where you have to honor order of operations. You need to separate things with parentheses. And so there is an expressions element within this Toolbox plugin that lets you get more specific with your mathematical expressions. So just as an example here, let's say I have 3 variables. Okay, let's say 100, 200, and 5. And I want to calculate with these 3 variables the following math expression. So I've just displayed in text here to show you behind the scenes what the math expression is. Again, I'll take you into the editor and I'll show you where this actually takes effect, but this is the math expression that is happening. It's taking variable A, adding it to variable B, right? And that's inside of the parentheses, so we would get 300 there as the total. And we're going to multiply 300, that total, by this calculation here, which is 5 divided by 100, right? If I did 500, right? So we take the result of this, multiply by the result of this, and here's our final output. So again, the whole purpose around the expression element is to enable you to have more complex expressions where you need to do parentheses, order of operations. You can do exponents There's actually many more powerful things you can do there, but this is the first place that we like to look at when we need to work with more calculator type of expressions, okay? Now, the final plugin that we're going to look at is the Fuzzy Search and Autocorrect plugin. This is great for working with real-time fuzzy searches. So what I mean by that is a partial type of search. Right now, this is hooked up to search through our user database through either the first name or the last name. So if I start to type in GEL, I'm going to get loosely related matches. Okay, so Ross Geller, Monica Geller have come up because they both have GEL in their last name. Rachel Green is coming up because we are seeing G and E. It's a little bit looser of a search. You do have control over how precise the search result needs to be. So I can make it so that GEL does not include Rachel Green because it's not that close of a match. Of course, the more specific I get with my search, then, eventually we will filter out that third name there, right? If I type in Monica, M-O-N, so we're seeing O-N right here in John, which is still matching that. We see, M-A-N, which is kind of a loose result there. So this will allow you to create this kind of real-time fuzzy search of your data. And it's really popular with search features in general in Bubble. Okay, so again, all of these are plugins and they're extending capabilities in our app to work with data dynamically. A lot of this stuff is more to work with dynamically generated things that happen in real time without going through the database. In fact, I think the only thing, just kind of searching through quickly, I think the only thing that is actually referencing the database is the fuzzy search, because this is searching through our database of users. Everything else here is kind of an on-the-page browser side thing, which can really help with performance, especially when it comes to working with big lists of dates, big lists of times, big lists of API results, numbers, things like that, okay? And I've chosen these plugins as our recommended because they are so commonly used for many different types of features. Even if you're not going to need them in your application, I do encourage you to play around with them to get used to them. A lot of other plugins, the setups are very similar. So the more exposed you are to working with plugins that have similar setups, the easier it will be for you to work with other plugins in the future. All right, so let's dive into the editor here. And we're going to take a look at the first set of plugins around our calendars and times here. So the first one was Calendar Tool. The plugin looks like this. It's this one here, Calendar Tool. And literally the only thing you get is an element called Calendar Tool. So when you install this into your application, you can add the Calendar Tool element to your page. And that's right here. It's actually invisible to the user. You notice that we don't actually see anything there, but it does need to live on the page in order for this to function. So you can find this under your visual elements. Here's the calendar tool. So I just selected this and drew it on my page. Doesn't matter how big it is. It can be anywhere on your page. It just has to be on the page. Now, technically, the calendar tool does also generate a list of times, but we actually prefer using a separate plugin for list of times because you get more flexibility around the generation of those times. So we really only like to use the calendar tool for the creation of the dates in the month. All right. Now, to set it up, you need to provide a date in the month that you want to generate the dates for. So if I wanted to generate the calendar for, or I should say the list of dates for the current month, then I can provide the current date and time. It doesn't matter what the actual date is or the time. It's just the month associated with that date. And the tool will know the full list of dates to create for that month that this date is in. Okay, so if I go into the inspector and select that element, you see right there, it's invisible. I'm going to click on it. You see here that the current date and time, let me go to the structure. Today is October 10th, all right? And so it knows that we are in October. And the list of dates are going to be generated for the month of October. You can see here all of October, right, to the very end of October. And it will create trailing dates to fill in your initial week. Now, this plugin assumes, this plugin is specifically for creating a calendar in a repeating group. So it's going to assume that you've designed your calendar with this, standard calendar structure. It's 7 columns, right? One for each day of the week, and 5 rows, right? To ensure you capture any months that have 5 weeks. Some months may have less. So the tool will create however many trailing dates before to make sure that you fill in, or you're able to fill in the dates in the previous month. You, of course, don't have to show these dates. You can create a condition to hide them if they are not inside of the date of the month that you're looking at. Okay, so the main thing is that you're providing some date for the month that you want to look at. Now, if you use a custom state here, that will allow you to navigate between months because you can update your custom state to the next month or the previous month. And so this will automatically update and your calendar will change. It will reflect that. So the output of this plugin is the list of dates. Again, if we go to the inspector here, you can see that the output, it gives you the list of dates and you can reference that list of dates, and that is your data source for the repeating group here. Right now, again, you will also have a list of times. I would say ignore this. I prefer you use the other plugin for the list of times. You will have to populate this value here and this one here because it's a requirement for the plugin, but you don't have to use the output, right? Just the list of dates. So the list of dates is the data source for our repeating group. Notice that we have 5 rows fixed, 7 columns fixed, right, to get our grid, and the type of content is a generic date, and the data source is the calendar tool. That's our invisible elements list of dates. You can also see there's a couple of other states available to you here by default. It will expose the start of the month, so in our case October 1st, and the end of the month in our case right now it would be October 31st of this year. Okay, so you can access those if you want to, display them or highlight them in your calendar. So now that I have my data source, every cell represents a different date, and like I said, you can design the cell to have whatever you want inside of it. You can nest a repeating group of events filtered on the cell's date. You can make things clickable in here. We have a text element to display the current cell's date, but we're extracting the date. Remember, in Bubble, dates are technically dates and times. It's a full date format with every single component. So if I only want to display the date itself, so the 2nd or the 3rd here, then I want to extract that component. I don't actually want to see, October 1, 2022 or 2023 or whatever year it is, October 3rd, same year, and all of that over and over and over again. We just want to display the extracted date. Now, I do have a workflow set up here to kind of help you see how you can start to make this interactive. When I click on this text, I'm going to set a state. I have a state here on the repeating group itself called selected date, which is just a date value. And I'll save the current cell's date to that state, right? I click on it. That is my selected date. If I click on another date, it's going to override this value with that date. Okay, so I'm just changing my selected date, keeping track of it in a custom state. I could, of course, also save it to the database if I wanted. But what I've done here on the design is added a condition to change the color if the selected date is the cell's date, right? We only want to change the color here to blue. Right, let me close my debugger here. Only change the color if my selected date, my custom state, matches the current cell's date. So imagine every single one of these cells is checking to see, does this date match the selected? Is the 9th the same as the 12th? No, it's not. So it's not going to change color. Is the 10th the same as the 12th? No, it's not. It's not going to change the color. Is the 12th the same as the 12th, right? Then yes, that matches the condition. Let's click on the text here. You see the condition is passing. And so it will change the appearance according to whatever I've defined here. So my condition is saying, is the cell's date the same as, so we're going to do equals rounded down to, it's just going to compare the dates, okay? It doesn't matter what the time is, just the date, basically the date, month, and year is what gets compared there to the selected date, okay? That way you don't worry about the time component throwing anything off. So equals rounded down to the date, and if that is a match, then we change the appearance properties here. You'll notice that the other condition I have on this text element is to make the font a little bit lighter in gray if the cell's date month is not the same as the current month, right? Because I set up the calendar tool to generate the current month's list of dates. So if there is a date in here that does not match the current month, then we know that it should be faded out. And so that's these first ones. Let's actually just look at it from this perspective, from the calendar tool. These first few are all in September, right? They do not match the current month that we're in. And so those conditions will pass just on those first several dates to make them faded out in color, right? So there's the beginnings, kind of the baseline there for creating your custom calendar. Now let's take a look at the next plugin, which is the Date and Time Toolkit. So that is this one right here. And this actually comes with many different elements and events and workflow actions. And really the main one that I want you to look at for today is just this split date ranges. This is the one that we're going to be working with. This is the one that we use most often to generate our list of times. Okay. Technically, it is a list of dates that you're generating, but I'm using it to generate a list of time slots. This is a really powerful thing for that. So same thing, you'll have to add an invisible element to the page in order for this to work properly. So you can find that right here, split date ranges. And there's my instance of that element. Keep in mind, you can have multiple instances of these things. So if you need a list of time slots in one place and then a separate list of time slots with a different configuration somewhere else on the page, you can add multiple instances of it with their own configurations and reference those separately. So the way that this works is that you need to define a start and an end. Okay, a start and an end for our list of time slots. Notice that we have different units. So when we're working with times, we're typically doing it by either hours or minutes. So if you want to do it every hour or every 2 hours or something like that, or by the minute. So if I want to do every 15-minute slots, so you'll choose your step units and then the actual unit itself. So if I want to go by minutes, right now I have it set to 30. Notice that this is a dynamic area. So you can have your user control this. You don't have to hard code that number. And so we do need to pick kind of a start time and an end time. And so what I've done is I've taken the selected date from my calendar and rounded it down to the start of the day. So that means midnight, right? So midnight is my first time slot. The end is going to be midnight of the next day. Okay, so that way I get a full 24-hour period every 30 minutes. And that's the generation of time slots here. So let's take a look at the inspector, highlight here, and you'll see my output. It is October 12th. Notice that's the one that I've selected on. From 12 a.m., 12:30, 1, 1:30, 2, 2:30, right? Every 30 minutes, the full day, all the way up until October 13th, 12 a.m. Now, notice that the repeating group is not displaying that full list of times for the full day. And that is because at the repeating group level, I've done another filter. Okay, so I've created kind of my baseline here with this plugin, just a full day so that I can have a starting point. The repeating group can manipulate things further. So very similar to the calendar, having, working off the calendar tool as its data source, this repeating group is going to work off of the split date range element as well and grab that data source, which is our date list. Again, we're looking at it in terms of times, but technically they are dates. And so type of content here is date, and then there's our data source. So if I did not have this filter, I would see the full midnight to midnight time slot list. But I've added a filter to constrain the times. I only want the time slots if the hour is at 8 a.m. or greater, as well as less than 6 p.m., right? This is in 24-hour format. So I have 18 there, so 6 p.m. So this now constrains my time range between 8 and 6 p.m. And that's actually what we see here. Sorry, 6:30, because it's looking at the hour. And if I wanted to exclude 6:30, then I can manipulate things further from here. Okay, so this is now our list of time slots. Now, what I've also done in terms of interactivity, so you can see what you can do from here, is now I have this also selected, right? I can click here. I've got a condition to show me which time I've chosen. And all I'm really doing with this button click is updating my custom state from the calendar. And because this is now specific to the time, down to the half hour, it will retain the same date because this list of times is attached to that same date. But now it will be more specific with the time, right? If I choose the 17th, it's going to take me back to midnight because when I click on this, it's just going to be that raw date and the start of the day. But then clicking on 2 p.m. is going to take that same date, but be more specific about it and insert that selected time. Okay, so clicking on this text, or this button, I should say, is going to update the same custom state and just put in that same date because now every individual cell in this repeating group is different by time. Okay, and this text here is just displaying the value of our custom state so that we can see what we've chosen. Here, selected date and time, there is the value of my custom state. All right, so there are our calendar tools and date and time toolkit plugins. Now, the API connector, let's take a look at the plugin over here. you would install this API connector, and anytime you want to connect to an external service, you're going to add an API. And so we've connected to our ActiveCampaign account, and depending on what kind of authentication system that service requires, you can choose any one of Bubble's presets. This covers all of the standards, or you can self-handle it. If you're going to work with something that's a bit more custom, or maybe the API doesn't have an authentication requirement, it's more of an open API. There are certainly some of those out there. Then you can choose none or self-handle, and it's not going to require you to fill anything in. In our case, our API key that ActiveCampaign has created for us lives in the header, and that's where we're going to supply it there. Now, there is a lot to know about working with the API connector, structuring calls properly, structuring your API keys properly. We actually have a completely separate course, our API bundle, that walks you through all of this in much more depth, setting up calls, using them in your application, various examples with a different authentication system. We work with different APIs as examples, a lot of common ones. So if this is something that you think you're going to need in your application and you're not really sure kind of where to begin, I do encourage you to take a look at our API bundle, which is separate from the Fast Track course. But to show you an example here of how we've got this hooked up, we've created a call. So this is an API request, right? A communication that's happening to retrieve our subscriber lists. Okay, and so we need to provide essentially an address to the API. This involves our account with the API, which is connected to our key. We're telling Bubble that we want to use this as a data source. And from here, we can retrieve that information. So I can actually run this call internally by clicking on this button here, reinitializing it, and it's going to show me all the details about my subscriber lists that I've set up in ActiveCampaign. This is all the raw data that ActiveCampaign has sent over to me via API. And so once I'm able to successfully initialize that, now I can use this call as a new data source. I've extended functionality. We can also use things as actions too. I can, for example, set up a call to subscribe a new user so that, when my user is interacting with a form, for example, on my page, they can fill out their details, click on a button, and it would trigger an API call that I've configured here in the workflow. It's a custom action that I've created, to trigger that API. So because this particular one is used as a data source, for my example here, I have a repeating group, and you'll notice that my type of content is not an option set. It's not a data type in my data structure. It's actually a new data source that's been created as a result of initializing that API. It's the get contacts, that was the name of the call, list, right? So this is a list of subscriber lists. And my data source is here. If there were any other, filters and parameters, there's a lot you can do to customize these calls. You can add parameters to specify, maybe I only want lists that are active versus lists that have been updated in the last, 3 months or something like that. I can really custom control what kind of response I get back. So if there were other details to fill out, this window could have more fields for me to specify. And there's my data source. It's just that list there. And inside of the cell, I've got a group here to kind of help highlight them. But I can display all that information from the API. Again, this is from the API structure. This is not coming from my database. I've not set up all these fields in the database, right? So Bubble learned the architecture of the API response to be able to use that architecture and actually display those different field values in my app. In this case, I'm just showing the list name, right? So we have our newsletter, we have specific segments for our different, products that folks have purchased, things like that, okay? So there's the API connector. There's, again, like I said, there's a lot to know about it, but I wanted you to be aware that this is available here to really allow you to connect to the outside world. Very, very powerful stuff. Okay, the next one we're going to look at here is the Toolbox plugin. So like I said, this Toolbox plugin is kind of like a Swiss Army knife of capabilities. There's lots of different things. They don't all relate to each other. They're kind of all standalone. This plugin technically also lets you run custom JavaScript. So if you've been keeping an eye out or wondering where you can create your own JavaScript in your app, this would be a great plugin to add so you can do that. You can run your own JavaScript. What we're going to be looking at today are just two elements. list of numbers, and expression. Okay, so the list of numbers is our number generator. This is another one where, again, we have to add, let me move this over here, our invisible element, list of numbers, that is this guy right there, to the page in order for it to work. And all we need to provide is the start number, the number of items in the list. This does not equate to the ending number. It's just the number of items that you want, and then the increment. So do you want it to skip 1, skip 5, skip 10? Okay, if you want it to be just a completely sequential, you just type in 1 there. You'll notice that I made this dynamic so that my user can enter in their own numbers, their own start, length, and increment, so that it's more of like a real-time update, of numbers, right? Five numbers, or change this to 10 numbers, and it happens in real time there. And that's all it is. You just provide those variables, and then I've got a repeating group here to display the output of that element. This is the invisible list of numbers element. Here's my output, the list of numbers list. And so inside of this cell, I can do whatever I want with it. Right now, I'm just displaying the actual number, but I can get much more customized with this. And, I might not want to show the number, but I might need to reference the number to maybe filter on another query or do whatever I need, maybe conditionally design the cells, maybe every other one based on the number, every odd number, really the sky's the limit there. Okay, so the next plugin within the toolbox, or I should say the next element within the toolbox plugin is this one here, the expression element, expression. So here is the invisible element that we're going to add in this case. Okay, so expression is right there. It looks like a little chalkboard there with a little math calculation happening. And here's where you configure your formula. Now notice that you can mix and match static characters with dynamic values. So I can take my input A, which I've just got my 3 inputs here for the user, again, to control this in real time. These are all integers. So I can take input A, I can add it to input B, and here I happen to be using Bubble's built-in, math operators. So these are the basic ones here. I could have also just typed in a plus symbol, and it would have recognized that to take A plus B. Just like you can see here, I typed in the star, the asterisk, to do a multiplication. But I've also typed in my parentheses to separate everything. Okay, so I just created some random expression here and inserted any dynamic values, but you can mix and match your components. I know that this is going to be a number at the end of the day. Technically, this expression can actually be much more customized with, pulling in values from your database, from other dynamic data sources. I believe you can even use JavaScript in here. It's possible that your expression may output a list of items. It might not even be a number. So this is also another very powerful thing for you to create more complex expressions in one place. I mean, this is more like a multi-line editor, so it can be easier to work with to output something. So as long as you define the right output type and format, then you're good to go. So here in my text, all I've done is just for preview purposes, show you what that expression was. So I'm just displaying this. This is just a text element. This isn't actually going to calculate anything. And then this here is displaying the result. The result of my expression is the value there. Is that final single number output. Okay, the last plugin that we're going to look at is the Fuzzy Search and Autocorrect. Okay, now make sure that when you go to install this plugin, that it is this one here, ZQ Fuzzy Search and Autocomplete by Zerocode. There is another one out there called Search and Autocorrect that behaves very similarly. It used to pretty much work the same way, but it is no longer supported. It's actually published by a different company. Just make sure you don't mix these up because this one is not maintained. And so if updates ever happen in the Bubble engine and plugins are also updating alongside of it, that you get the one that is being supported here. It's this one here, ZQ Fuzzy Search and Autocomplete. So this comes with an element, another invisible element, the Search and Autocorrect. It also comes with an action for you to reset your search input. So that's a nice little handy trigger there for you. So the invisible element I have designed here, we can find it. Let me see if I can get to it. It should be let me see if I can find it. I think I've lost it. There it is. Search and Autocorrect. It's the one, again, not the magnifying glass. We do have both of them installed right now, but it's this one right here where it looks more like a list or a piece of paper. And the way that this works is you need to tell the plugin what it is you want to search through. So whether this is your internal database or it's an option set or a data source from API or some other value custom state, you just need to define the list, the type of your list that you're searching through. In our case, we're searching through our users. And the data source, of course, so I want to search through all of my users. I could, of course, specify maybe it's only users that are active or have a certain status or created after a certain date, whatever it might be, belong to a certain company, whatever relationships. And then you want to define the fields that you're going to search against, that match against with your input here, right? So I type in, the first few characters of a name, which fields within that data source am I actually matching against? Okay, because the user could have many different types of text fields, like a biography or, a city name or something like that. We don't necessarily want to search through those. So I only want to search through the first name and the last name. I could have also done full name too. And you have up to 5 search fields. So you want to indicate those. Now, there are 2 ways to have the plugin match against your search query. Your query can be inserted here, text to match. So I could have done, my input, where is my search? I just need to find the name here, input users. Okay, so I could have said, take the value of my input users and match against that. Or, and I'm going to remove this for now, match it against an input that is identified by an ID attribute. So it's essentially doing the same thing. We're telling it to look at the same input, but through a different method. We're telling the plugin to look at it identify it via an ID, which is actually faster. It's actually more optimized if you ask the plugin to find your input's value via ID. It just kind of goes into the underlying code of your structure. It's more direct for the plugin to do it that way. So in order to give your input an ID, if you click on the input here and scroll to the bottom, you can type in any ID you want. It's whatever you want to call it here under the ID attribute. Now, if you don't see this property here, go into your settings, then go into general, and then scroll kind of halfway down the page here. Expose the option to add an ID attribute to HTML elements. Check that box. When you check that box, it's going to expose the ability here to insert an ID. Now, most of the time, the only reason you want to give an input or any element, this is not just for inputs. Notice, with the text element, I could give it an ID as well. Most of the time, it's going to be for working with plugins. There's a lot of plugins out there that need to communicate with your elements, and going through the ID is the best way to do that. Now, another tip that I want to give you is with search ID specifically, try not to give the ID attribute just the name of search, because search is a very common ID for elements across the web that browsers might actually pick up on it and start to autofill with extensions or auto-populate with previous search results, or even things like autofill with addresses, phone numbers, names, all of the common stuff that people tend to search through in forms across the web. Browsers know to recognize the ID of search because it's so popular to, for web developers to name them that. So I would actually give it a more specific name. Search users like this with a hyphen is specific enough that my browser isn't trying to autofill it with things. I mean, you can make it whatever you want. It can even be dynamic if necessary. So that's just a little tip there for you. So whatever ID you put here, you want to make sure that it matches the ID that you have in the plugin settings. That way it knows what input to communicate with. Again, you could technically have multiple instances of this search and autocorrect plugin on your page that are communicating with different inputs, so the IDs will help you keep them apart. Okay. Now, if you are going to go with the ID, make sure you check this box, because this sort of enables, it turns on the plugin to look at it via ID. The next setting here that you do want to pay attention to is the thresholds. Remember, when I was typing in MON, for example, we were getting some matches that weren't exactly right. They were loose, but not exactly right. If you want a more specific, a closer match, you want to go down in numbers. So the range is from 0 to 1. So if I did, 0.3 or 0.4, now it's going to be more specific of a match. So notice MON is giving me 3. Let's see if going down to 0.4 still gives me the same. I would imagine it's going to knock out, maybe 1 or 2 of those and just give me Monica. We'll see. But that's the threshold number that you want to play with. If you are at 0, then it's going to look for an exact match. If you're closer to 1, it's going to be much, much looser. So there we go, MON. That's still not specific enough. Let's do 0.3. Let's see if this knocks out any more. We'll also take a look at some of the other settings that you have around how loose or close this match needs to be. All right, let's try it again. There we go. So 0.3 is now more specific, that it's only going to give me Monica there. Okay. You can make it so that it's required to be case sensitive. In most cases, you know, doing a fuzzy search like this, you want to leave this turned off so that it doesn't matter whether the user types in MON like that or MON with a capital M. But that's, of course, up to you. And most of the time, you can leave the rest of these settings as is, but just so that you're aware, the location is at which point do you want the plugin to start looking for matches. Location 0 means starting at the beginning of the string. So here at M, we could say, you know, start at, you know, 3 characters in or 4 characters in, and it will begin the matches here. That's helpful if you know that your search results have a prefix or something that you want to exclude. You know, first 3 characters are always the prefix. We don't want to match against those. That's helpful. And then how far into the string do you want to look? So I want to look within the first 100 characters or the first 10, right? So that gives you control there. And then the number of characters that you want to exclude. If it's shorter than 2, then we don't really want to show anything yet because it's not really enough to go off of. So I recommend that you play around with this and check out all the different settings to see how precise you want your search results to be. So if there are matches, the plugin will expose a state called matches, and that is just going to be the same list type of the data type that you've indicated here. So in my repeating group, to show my results, type of content is still user, but my data source is no longer a search for users. My plugin is doing that. Instead, I want to go to the search and autocorrects matches, right? It's the results of the fuzzy search that it's come up with is what I want to ultimately display there. But because the cells are still users, I can design this however I want. I can still show the user's first name, last name, any other details, just like if the data source was coming from my database. All right, everyone, that is a handful of really powerful plugins that we use all of the time for working with dynamic data, really extending functionality. So again, I encourage you to get your hands on this. Even if you're not going to use these in your app specifically, these are super helpful for understanding, you know, external data sources, real-time generations of things, working with those IDs, working with APIs, because the more control you have over those, the more sophisticated you can, you know, make your own app. All right, happy building.